I will be talking about sacred trees and the different aspects of it. I have been working for the German Archaeological Institute on Rapa Nui for the longest time, and have a position with the Kiel University with the Institute for Ecosystem Research, and that's what is no worries. What's the basis for looking into human-environment interactions? And we have heard several papers on the subsistence-related planting of trees and vegetation changes, introduction of species, and obviously the Polynesian islands with their transported landscape are a very interesting example of these human-environment interactions. So when we talk about sacred trees, that is a Polynesian phenomena. We know for this area, we know of the specific species, what deities they were associated with, and that they had a role in the religious architecture of the Mare or the Meae in the Marquesas. So that is, one of the two projects that I will be talking about. We have the first project that I'm involved in, which is kind of the basis of this interest in the topic of sacred trees, is the pre-contact resource management on Rapa Nui by the German Archaeological Institute. And then this project on sacred trees in East Polynesia, namely in the Marquesas, is kind of a spin-off that developed out of what we found on Rapa Nui. So trees and Rapa Nui, that's not necessarily something that where trees come to mind. If you look at this picture, the view from the Poike Peninsula over the island, very similar to what Patrick Kirch was mentioning for Mangareva. For Rapa Nui, we have to bear in mind that with this transported landscape, people were faced with a very different kind of climate zone. So a tropical island, a subtropical island, as opposed to tropical islands. And that had an effect on what kind of tree species were successful there. And namely, the big trunked, like the calophyllum, which are essential for canoe building, they never survived or never made it to Rapa Nui. So that is a big factor when we're talking about isolation, as demonstrated by Mary through the linguistic approach. Definitely the fact that you don't have trees to build your voyaging canoes with in such a remote island, that is a huge factor that would contribute to that. The original vegetation on Rapa Nui was largely a Eubaea species palm forest. This is a photo from mainland Chile, which is considered to be the closest relative to the now extinct Easter Island palm. And palms are not a very suitable species for canoe building, for example. So basically, what we looked into, this aspect of trees on Rapa Nui, is only really ever mentioned in the context of deforestation and ecocide. But we found some indications that trees might have had a spiritual value also on Rapa Nui, even though there are no oral traditions, no traditional knowledge, much in contrast to here in French Polynesia. Just a quick introduction to the site for those of you who have not seen presentations on it. So the site of Avarangauka, Aturokahau, is located in the very center of the island. Mara actually had the most inland ahu of the island is part of that site, and Mara had that in her map as well. So we have an ahu, we have a moai, we have a crematorium, we have a burial cyst, and we have extensive paved areas in the center of the site with a partially covered canal. You will see come up here with dramatic suspense. And in this paved area, we found something extremely unusual and very significant for Rapa Nui, and those are those circular spaces, those stone-rimmed circular spaces, and inside those we found the molds of palm roots. So we have evidence for palm trees growing inside a paved area at a religious site, and not only in the lower part in the pavement, but also on the high bank in front of the Ahu, in the plaza of the Ahu. We have evidence for a planted palm tree as part of a religious site on Rapa Nui. This is a reconstruction. So that brought me to the question of, the significance of sacred trees and the role of sacred trees in religious architecture in general. And the Marquesas are a very good study ground for this because of the very limited infrastructure in the interior and much of the original vegetation still being preserved. What we did was a three-phase approach. So we located also very much in cooperation with Jean-François Buteau, who told me about sites with giant trees where there's some potential that they are actually old enough and contemporaneous with the architecture. And then we did a campaign to date the trees. So we did dendrochronology on living trees, and then mapping of the sites, including the locations of those trees. And I published in the DAP that we all very kindly got a copy of much of the aspects of the layout. This is my colleague Uwe, who will forever be a legend on Nukuhiva because we were there in December and kids were screaming, "Papa Noel, Papa Noel." And what Uwe and his lab assistant Alex, they were able to establish is that there are actually, which is always a subject of debate, how possible is dendrochronology in the tropics where you don't have those marked seasons. And they were able to identify tree rings and then to correlate them with annual rainfall patterns. So it's actually not just random increment rates, but it's actual tree rings. And we found some what I consider surprisingly old dates of calculating from the cores and the increments rates that Uwe was able to calculate after looking at the samples under the microscope. So for the ironwood, the toa, the oldest specimen that we were able to document, 320 years old. So that's what that part of the inbuilt age and the significance of this for inbuilt age. Which was not a focus of what we originally wanted to do, but definitely is an important kind of side effect if you even want to limit it to that. There are several very impressive trees, and I've actually gotten a couple of questions. Do you know this tree? And do you have an idea of how old it is? And so there are some very famous specimens, and I really like this idea of having a living organism that is kind of an eyewitness of what happened at those sites, and is in the ideal case still a living organism today. We narrowly missed the living aspect of one very famous tree at the site of Upeke on Hivaoa, and it was actually mapped by Catherine Chavalion and Eric Olivier. It's this ma'i, so a badamier. And Jean-François, again, was kind enough to provide this picture on the left. And he, who has been everywhere and has seen pretty much, I would claim, every tree, he says that is by far the biggest badamier that he's ever seen. Now, it fell. We were not exactly sure, but something like 7 to 10 years ago, it was infected with mushrooms, and so the tree fell, and much of the lower part of the trunk was removed. Actually, some carvings at the cultural center at Hivaoa for sale from this tree. But through this photo and the trunk that we still found at the site, and through this nodule that I hope you can see in the pictures, we could estimate more or less that what we still had of the trunk, the height of it of about 7 meters. Really, what we have for scale is this person at the bottom, and so we did C14 samples of the core of at that height, just about 7 meters from the roots, from the ground. And also did dendrochronology, and these are the dates from the C14 analysis. And in correlation with the tree ring dating, we can pretty much narrow down that time frame to the dates that we have from the tree ring dating is 330 years, which is extremely conservatively calculated because we used the most conservative mean increment rates for all our calculations. And also we didn't even get close to the widest part of the trunk, because that is a nice tiki bowl at the community center in Atuona now. Two other very famous trees that I get a lot of questions about are on Nukuhiva in the north. We have the site of Turitipuna on Nukuhiva. And here you have two planted temanu in a row with a maximum diameter of 2 meters and 80. And again, here, part of it was cut, probably because when it leaned over the road, it was in the way and had to be cleared. And so we have again C14 dates from the core of one of the big branches, and also from the base where the tree actually fell forward. And that's our assistant Alex there taking the sample. And so again, just through the diameter of the trunk, we can with pretty much certainty narrow the dates down to the older date range here. One other one, I think everybody who has been to Nukuhiva has been to Kamuihe with this giant banyan. And banyans were one of those trees that have a very nice and a very clear ring signal. But on the other hand, they are impossible to make any sense of with those parallel vertical growth and all those aerial roots. But just as a general idea, as a general perspective, on increment and age, we had a 40-centimeter diameter disc, and we had 96 years in the 40 centimeters. So that is just a rough idea. So here we are dealing with, safe to say, a very old tree. Just a few other results. So from the cores that my colleagues took from the living trees, and the correlation with climate data, and then the correlation between different tree species. They were able to calculate that mean annual increment for a different species, and this is the different species that we did our analyses on, with the mean increment in millimeters, and the oldest specimen that we had in our sample base. So that's the importance, I think, when it comes to inbuilt age and the problematic of it, that trees get a lot older in the tropics than at least I was aware of. When we come to the monumentality, that is one of those important aspects. Generally, the sites in the Marquesas, even though megalithic, they are rather low. So I was surprised to see the heiau that Polema showed for Hawaii, how high that was, and these giant trees that form a part of the architecture, they really add to the monumentality and to the visibility of those sites. And yeah, that is one of those very interesting aspects of how they have this integral role in the architecture. So the question brings me back to Rapa Nui and the findings of palm tree plantations there. So many of those sacred tree species that we know from the Marquesas, also from the Society Islands and other Polynesian islands, they never existed on Rapa Nui. So these big, impressive trees that would add to monumentality of a site were inexistent. So it would make sense to adapt that phenomena onto the biggest, most monumental and most visually impressive tree that the vegetation on the island actually has to offer, and that we have evidence for that that was done at the site of Avaranga Uka, that this might be a local adaptation of a religious concept. And what's very interesting, or I think a very nice aspect of this, that the dates we have for the palm trees at Avaranga in the very center of Rapa Nui, they post-date the generally accepted dates for deforestation. So Avaranga at the same time is a kind of sanctuary for this tree species, where the possibly last examples of that species survived. And in that sense, it's a kind of a manifestation of conservation through a religious significance of a natural element, in this case, a tree. Thank you very much. Maururu, Ko'uta Arnui, merci.